Hello, Buckeye fans, and welcome to another episode of the Hello, Buckeye fans, and welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I am Patrick Murphy here with you. We got a lot to talk about today. We got a big game for the Buckeyes. We've got an injury that I debated whether or not we should talk about it more because it's been talked about ad nauseum already, but I think it's worth adding some more information from Ryan Day. We got a lot. We're going to go through all this. We're going to talk the Ohio State side. We'll be joined by Matt Weaver from our Indiana site here in a little bit to hear about the Hoosiers side of things and the special season in Bloomington. But let's get right into it. And to talk, as we do often, about the Buckeyes, we've got Timmy Hall here. Hi, Tim. How are we today?
Patrick, thanks for having me on. How are you doing today? I'm
good. I'm about to be better. I've got a North High Brewing Company beer here. It's called the Lager, and if you're not watching this, it is scarlet and gray, so that caught my eye. And it says Ohio inspired. I don't know if you know this, Tim, but we are in Ohio, so I thought that was a good idea for today's show before a big game Saturday.
That's great. Well, I would be sipping on a nice frosty Coors Light, proud sponsor of the Buckeye Show. I think we're going to have some live shows coming up here soon too that I'll be able to tell the listeners about shortly. I hope some people come out and see us. I don't know which exact spots yet, but I've been told that we'll be out somewhere in December, thanks to our guys at Coors Light, and possibly a bunch of shows in January as well. So maybe getting people pumped up and excited for what our football team is going to do and what games they're going to be playing in. But I'm here at work, so the mountains aren't blue for me right now. Tim, my God. Oh, geez. He's right. He's right over there.
I don't know. He's asking what you're drinking. I don't know if you know this gentleman or not. Yeah. For those listening, Tim is miming drinking a beer as T-Bone, also from the fan, asks what he is drinking. Thanks for that. Well, I like the idea of these live shows. Maybe someday you'll invite me back on, whether it's live or, calling in or those things. We've kind of lost our way here.
Someday. Well, Patrick, I need to have a show to invite you on. There is one thing. I mean, we sit and we watch Buckeye basketball together. I do love this time of the year, though. It gets a little crazy. It gets a little chaotic. You know me, like I've been this way for 12 years. I mean, I understand how we're always going to be, football is always going to be the biggest thing. I'm not ever going to debate that or say that it won't be, but I am still always going to be that guy that says you can find room in your heart to start paying attention to both and not have to wait until Buckeye football season is done, especially if you got a team that was ranked in the top 25, which they were after their first week of the season. I know they dropped out, but I think the Buckeyes are a team that are going to be making their way back in to the top 25 here soon.
Yeah, certainly a possibility, but that is a topic for a different week, given what we've got in store for us. Let's start with Seth McLaughlin. I'm sure you've talked about it a good amount. I know we have. I talked about it with Dave on the M5 yesterday, but we found out for sure from Ryan Day last night that pretty much what everyone expected, the move of Carson Hinsman from guard to center and Austin Sareveld coming in. Like I said, I think this is what most people expected, but what are your thoughts and how do you think that works as we head into a game against Indiana where that interior of the offensive line will be tested?
Talk about what you expected and what actually happened. That was my gut reaction when I heard that Seth McLaughlin was down. People look at follow the Buckeye Show Twitter account. It's simply just that, at the Buckeye Show on Twitter and X. And right after that news broke, I was sitting here at work that night. The Buckeye men's basketball team was playing. The college football playoff ranking show was on that night too. Just 2 nights ago, obviously. And me and Adam King are watching these rumors start to fly. And I texted you even. We knew that Jerry was there at the basketball game as well. But, and if you're not there, you're not going to go verifying or confirming things unless you are absolutely sure. And what we were saying to each other is, like, typical. Where there's smoke, there's fire. It's not like the news about Seth McLaughlin. Nobody would come up with something fake. That it's too weird to make something like that up. And as we see, obviously it was real. It's news. Guy goes down, and getting to that point when that happened, my mind went right to Carson Hinsman. It just went right to we just put a guy back in the starting lineup that played center for you the entire year in 2023. And I know that they were having some issues with him down the stretch, but you still look at the experience, right? And you still look at how that was a team that until the Michigan game was 11-0, right? They were winning all their games with that setup until the last one when it got them. And then that game that shall not be talked about that didn't even feel like it really happened, the bowl game against Missouri. I still don't even think that was a real game that occurred. So I thought that would be the move. And some people initially said, well, look at Joshua Padilla, redshirt freshman from Huber Heights. He'd been coming in behind Seth McLaughlin lately to try to maybe keep that continuity that you just established with Carson Hinsman at left guard and Donovan Jackson at left tackle. So don't disrupt the left side. But I don't know, Pat. I still think this is the right thing. I think that going with a guy that's played that many real football games and has that much experience under his belt at the center position, that can't be ignored. And that certainly it rises above the spot duty that a guy like Josh Padilla has built up. So I'm with that decision. And I'm hopeful that Austin Seerveld can pick up the pieces and make a smooth transition because he's played a bit already with some earlier injuries to guys up front. I said it last night. This Seth McLaughlin, this is a big loss. This hurts. I would expect there to be some bumps in these next two games. You have to win them despite those bumps, and you can't get into a mode where you can allow this to disrupt what your ultimate goals are going to be. It's just going to be a little bit harder and a little bit more challenging now.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think this is the right decision to go with. Ryan Day said after the Penn State game, they went with Carson and Donovan at those two positions because they wanted experience in a game like that. Well, maybe not the same atmosphere for the offense, but every game here on out is going to be a game like a top 5 game against Penn State. Whether you're on the road, whether you're at home, whether at a neutral site, whatever it may be, you're playing good teams from here on out. And so I think experience makes a big difference. And I think that's part of the reason they went this route. And to your point, the experience Carson got last year will be valuable. Even if he wasn't great at times last season, he's now spent an entire offseason working with Seth McLaughlin, and those two worked closely together. He's played alongside Seth McLaughlin. I also have to imagine he's pretty motivated. Talking to him after the Penn State game about his opportunity to get back in there at guard, I think the chance to now go show, okay, I can still do those center things too, I think is an opportunity. Not exactly what you want, obviously. Yeah. And sucks for Seth McLaughlin, obviously. I talked about this on our show on Wednesday. Just a great kid who's doing some good things, both really good things on the field, important things off the field with his fundraiser and the Run the Damn Ball hats. So
Run the Damn Ball hat, right?
Yeah,
I want one of those.
Sold out.
I'd like one of those.
Yes, that would be great. You can buy them when they come back in stock to help Seth out here. But
they just got to be in stock.
Yes, I do think the Buckeyes, as much as we've talked about the offensive line as like maybe the weak link on the offensive side, maybe the whole team, they've been able to replace these guys pretty well. If you take out the Zen Michalski experiment against or Nebraska,
the first half,
right? I mean, we'll see what happens. Obviously, we don't know what this is going to look like, but I think if you went to pick your top team with a good offensive line, you take out their starting left tackle and their starting center at that point in the season, the halfway point, and with 2 games left, I don't know if many teams can replace it. And again, we'll see where this leads and how it all works, but I feel okay, probably better than okay with what the Buckeyes are going to do there going forward. And again, we'll see what it looks like against Indiana. Tim, I know you don't have a lot of time, so I want to quickly move on to the Hoosiers. I'm going to talk to our guy, Matt Weaver, in a little bit about how they've turned this around so quickly, but just your perspective on this team as you've watched them this season, obviously blowing teams out left and right until you got to Michigan 2 weeks ago and had a little bit of some struggles in that game, still won. But what do you make of the Hoosiers this year?
Well, I think I make what a lot of people make of them, Pat, and probably you as well, that they're a really amazing story and they deserve a lot of credit. We get to this time of the year, and for some people, it's all about what can you find to tear down a certain team and how to nitpick. I mean, we do it to ourselves, right? We do it to the Buckeyes for sure. But I just think Indiana has been just an incredible story thanks to Kurt Signetti. I think I talked about this on the show last night too. Them doing it this year, is the start of something special. It's going to have to continue for a couple years for it to be fully proven. But we see a lot of programs that I think people just assume that they'll always be bad for whatever reasons. They just haven't had the pedigree, the history has not been there for a certain program. But I think this hire just shows you that a program like Indiana that's always been famed in basketball, but always just seemed to struggle and be the doormat at times of the Big Ten, you can just make the right hire and everything else can settle into place. And now with things being a little bit different in college football, even more so. So some of the guys that he brings over, that's the other thing too, is credit to all these James Madison Dukes, baby. I come from a JMU family. My sister and my brother-in-law, they both went to school there. So I do like the Dukes, and it's pretty cool to see a lot of their athletes finding some of this big-time success, albeit at another place. But it's impressive to see, who rolled through that program and how some of those players stepped up to the Big Ten now. And you can see that they're not just, Sun Belt good, right? Like that Mikhail Kamara, that is a guy that's going to be a factor in this game, and a specific factor in this game. When you look at number 6 for IU and what this guy did, 7.5 sacks his last year at JMU from a tackle position and 51 tackles, like those are ridiculous numbers. And he's already got 9.5 sacks this year, stepping up to the Big Ten level. So he is going to be something to watch. I think they're a really good football team, and gotten a chance to watch them a couple times. And Curtis Rourke from OU having a Bobcat transfer over to be their guy. He's been a very special player as well. So offensively and defensively, I think on both sides of the ball, they look like a really good team.
What is your concern level from a Buckeye perspective in this game? Obviously at home, Indiana hasn't beaten Ohio State since 1988, though there was that scare in 2020. 1 to 10, where do you put the meter?
So 10 being most concerned that we lose.
Yes.
I'll give Indiana some respect since I was just giving them there. I'll go above the 5 line. I'll say, no, I'll keep it right at a 5. Okay. I'll keep it right down the middle, because I am also, despite Seth McLaughlin's injury, I think this Buckeye team has gained a lot of confidence in the last 2 weeks. I think they have started to settle down in some areas now. I think you just go back to them beating Penn State. They didn't blow the doors off of Penn State, but why should that have been the expectation when you're going on the road against a team that's still in the top 5? So that's or remind me, what was Penn State ranked on Tuesday, Pat? What
they're number 6 now.
6, either way.
Yeah. Or number 4. Sorry, they're number 4.
There you go, number 4. So you beat them on the road. Then you follow that up with a couple of nice performances, working on some things. And this is just, I feel like you're getting back into the team of destiny, season of destiny type of feeling to it. You can almost make the argument that an injury to a center that's been playing so good even adds to that. How are you going to figure it out? How are you going to, get through this adversity when something bad did happen and still win these last 2 tough games that you got to win? You got to win, or you don't go to the Big Ten championship game. So I do think they're going to win it. And I think even if they win by a touchdown, I'm fine with this. Almost as a Al Davis just win baby type of game. It's a top 5 team. You might say they're Indiana on the brand level, but you look down and you see they're a top 5 team.
Yeah, I think for sure you have to treat this as that. And look, from here on out, it's just win for the Buckeyes. It doesn't matter what it looks like. Even against
win these 2 games.
Yeah, even against Michigan, which a struggling Michigan team. Matt Rannells said he's at a 7, so a bit more concerned than you. All right, Tim, I'm going to let you go, but I have to ask you this one last. we've got a AFC North battle tonight with the Cleveland Browns on Thursday Night Football. You got Browns or Steelers? Who you got?
Who do you think I got, Pat?
Big Browns guy, Tim Hall.
Yeah, big Browns guy. Yep. We'll have that game on ESPN Columbus, 1460, and the Fans HD2 on those special HD radios. Yeah.
I've never had one.
Tyvis Powell is going to be the best part of the Browns coverage, him talking about it.
There you go. All right, Tim. Thanks for the time. I know it's busy over there at the Fan with all the ping pong and whatnot going on. Pop a shot.
He's not even here today, Pat. I'm filling in with our friend T-Bone today.
You're right. You're playing ping pong by yourself then?
Yes, playing ping pong by myself. We'll double shift it. We'll have a 30-minute Buckeye show before we get you guys to Jackets hockey tonight.
All right. Thanks, Tim.
All right. Thank you, Pat.
Cheers. Thanks to Timmy for coming on. I saw a couple questions in our chat here. If you have more questions, either for me about the Buckeyes, about really anything college football, or if you have some questions about Indiana, we'll have Matt Weaver on here in about 10 minutes to talk about the Hoosiers season. So if you have questions for him about anything Indiana football, throw those in there. I'll save those for when he comes on, and we'll try and get to some of them. But Matt Rannells also said, do we use our big tight ends to help up front? I think that is certainly something the Buckeyes should consider. I thought they did a good job of helping in the Penn State game when Donovan Jackson was playing left tackle for the first time. I did not like the way the Buckeyes came out with Zen Michalski at left tackle against Nebraska. I did not think that they did much to help him in his first career start. I also think just schematically, the tight ends can certainly help. Up the middle, though, not as much. But I do think they can do some more quick passing games, things like that, to get the ball out quickly. Get the ball on the edge, use some of those screens, which have been much better this year. Things that just don't put Will Howard under pressure, especially early on. Let Carson Hinsman get settled in at center. Let Austin Saraveld get settled back in at left guard. And, just move it quickly. It doesn't, you don't need to hurry to the line or anything, but just snap the ball, 1-2 reads, make it simple so that Will Howard's getting the ball out, try and run the ball. I think those would all be things schematically the Buckeyes can do, especially early on, to kind of help everybody settle into this new run. And then it's just me, Tim 79 said, I think we stop Indiana's run and make them one-dimensional and win. I think stopping Indiana's run shouldn't be much of a difficulty. Hoosiers average 176.7 yards per game, number 47 in the country. Ohio State has the country's number 4 rush defense, allowing 90.7 yards per game. So I think Indiana, not one-dimensional, but they certainly lean more to the pass side of things. I think obviously that's going to be where Ohio State is most concerned. I think Indiana's number 23 in the country in passing yards at 276.5 yards per game. Obviously, Curtis Rourke, some of these receivers that have had really good seasons. And it's like Ohio State, not maybe the level, but between Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper, Miles Price, all those guys have 24 more catches. All of them have over 350 receiving yards. All of them have at least 2 touchdowns. Surratt and Cooper each have 5 or more touchdowns. So similar to Ohio State, the Hoosiers like to spread that ball around a little bit. It's not one guy that you have to focus on. And obviously the Ohio State secondary, the pass defense is been a question this week. I think it's a bit more overblown than people have made it. Sometimes you give up catches as cornerbacks. Denzel Burke last week, everyone's talking about the play made on the sideline. I think he probably could have fought a little bit more to get to that ball, but it was a hell of a throw and a hell of a catch. And sometimes that happens. Indiana is going to try similar things with the back shoulder. So certainly Ohio State has to be better that way in defending those. I know last night, the Buckeye corners, Denzel Burke, Davison Igbinosun, I don't know if I saw Jermaine Matthews over there, were working at the far end of the field while we were doing interviews on those back shoulder throws. So certainly the Buckeyes are aware of it. Obviously with Davison Igbinosun, it's trying to limit the penalties, right? And you want him to be aggressive and you want him to play his game, but you also know you've got to avoid those pass interference calls, those holding calls. Jim Knowles was asked this week, do you just kind of live with one or two a game from him? And he said, no, you keep coaching them so that you can kind of stamp that out a little bit. And that's important, vitally important in a game like this and these games going forward. One or two calls can swing a big game, as we've seen in the past. Now, I think Davison's done a really good job of kind of putting those penalties behind him. We saw it against Penn State. He gets the holding call, I believe it was, and then comes back with the interception in the end zone a few plays later. Similarly, last week against Northwestern, gets called for pass interference, a play that I thought, right call, but then Ohio State didn't get the same call a little bit later when Indiana did pretty much the exact same thing. And Ryan Day was pissed about that on the sideline. And then Davison Igbinosun comes back and gets the pass breakup on 4th down. So you see the good and the bad there. You want to see more good than bad with him going forward. Jermaine Matthews, I thought, has continued to play pretty well. Northwestern was tough at times, had some guys get in behind him. It will be interesting to see how much the Buckeyes rotate a guy like Jermaine Matthews, who has obviously played in a big game before, having started the Penn State game in 2023 when Denzel Burke was out, but hasn't played nearly as much as the other two corners. Does this rotation continue this week? And Jermaine Matthews, let me pull up the snap counts here. Jermaine Matthews has definitely worked his way into a rotation the last couple weeks. Does that continue this week? I would assume so. I believe the Buckeyes have faith in Matthews to put him out there. He's played 40 snaps 2 weeks ago and 36 snaps last week, and not all of that was in the second half garbage time. Now, he was the most targeted corner by Northwestern, and he did give up the most catches. So we'll see. Matt Reynolds again asks, if Burke starts struggling, do you replace him with Matthews? Last week, when Burke gave up the 3rd down pass, which was the one that I thought was the issue more so than the sideline pass, the Buckeyes did pull Denzel Burke out of the game right after that play. Now, Jermaine Matthews, I believe, was already in, so I think it was Davison Igbinosun who came in for him. But I think the Buckeyes understand, they've got to win these games. So, you've got to do what you got to do at this point. And obviously against Oregon, Denzel Burke stayed in the game. I thought he figured things out in the second half. In this game, I thought he figured things out in the second half against Northwestern as well, but it was after he came out of the game. So, look, I trust the Buckeye coaching staff here to make the right decision. They work with Denzel every day. They know how to handle these guys. So yes, I think if he does struggle, then it would not surprise me if he comes in, or if he comes out and Jermaine Matthews or whoever's the guy on the sideline at that point comes in. Rick Montoya asked, does Knowles send the house early and often? I think you will see similar to what you've seen these last couple of weeks from the defense in terms of the pressure. They were very aggressive early against Northwestern, maybe overly aggressive. So I don't know if you take that same approach. Obviously, we'll see how the coin toss goes and who gets the ball first. But I don't expect Jim Knowles to back away from the aggression in this game. It's about finding the right times to do it and getting the call right, and obviously execution. I thought the two linebackers through the same gap last week was effective. I wonder if we'll see more of that. Maybe that's something they've done in the past that I just haven't noticed, but I did notice it at least a couple times against Northwestern, and it led to some success. So yeah, I think I think they will be aggressive. I think you have to be aggressive in a game like this. And you can't not play your defense. And since the Oregon game, that has, for the Buckeyes, included being aggressive, bringing pressure, finding some different ways to cause quarterbacks to be uncomfortable. And it's just me, Tim points out, if you rattle their quarterback, they can't throw precise back shoulder throws. Yes, Ryan Day, just before I got on here, was on his radio show talking about the back shoulder throws and talked about how the rush and the coverage have to work together on that. It's not just the receivers defending the cornerbacks, defending the receivers there. If you can get pressure on Curtis Rourke to cause some issues, then obviously it provides a more difficult situation to make some of those throws. So certainly I think the Buckeyes will be keying on the opportunity to get to Curtis Rourke and at the very least make him feel uncomfortable. How they do that, we'll see. But I think it will look similar to how it's looked in recent weeks. All right, let's get to the Indiana part of our show and do that. We've got Matt Weaver from Peegs, our Indiana site. Matt, how you doing today?
I'm okay. How are you?
I am good. I think the first question, and I'm sure you've answered this a number of times throughout the season, but this turnaround by Indiana from what they were a year ago, obviously led by Curt Cignetti. As you've kind of been there along the way, can you take Buckeye fans through how this has happened, how you have seen a rather remarkable turnaround that I don't think anyone saw coming,
Well, I mean, it's hard to really put your finger on exactly how he's done it. I mean, this is a guy that just has a knack for turning programs around. And I know it was at lower levels, but he went to Indiana, Pennsylvania, D2 school. They were terrible, and they immediately started winning. He goes to Elon. They were really bad, and immediately starts winning. And I know James Madison had been good, but he even elevated them a little bit more than where they had been. In his last 2 years, they were transitioning from FCS to FBS, right. And I think they won like 19 or 20 games over those 2 years. So he's just, I always say the buzzwords of culture and mindset and attitude get thrown around. He's just got a knack for doing that. I mean, and he made some rather bold and kind of, eyebrow-raising statements when he first came in, when he first was hired at the Big Ten Media Day, when he was with the Big Ten BTN crew, and he said, I thought I should come up here because we're going to be playing here next year in the championship game. And everybody shook their head. And I think, I don't know if that's, people who are closer to him say that's not really who he is. He's not like a cocky guy. I just think when he came in here, this is a program that's obviously, I mean, you guys know it's been beaten down. I mean, Indiana is the get right game. It's the feel good game for most of the Big Ten for years. This is the game where, if you're in a bad way, you play Indiana and you get everything straightened out. And this fan base had lost hope. There was no optimism. The last 3 years under Tom Allen had been really bad, 9 wins, like 4 or 5 conference wins. And so he had to rattle some cages. He had to kind of wake some people up. And I think that's part of why he did what he did. But he's got a great staff. He's a very good X's and O's coach. It's interesting when you're at practice. When Tom Allen was the coach, he would have a blowhorn because Tom Allen always loses his voice, and you always knew where Allen was. He was running around the field, always yelling into that blowhorn. There's times I'll go to a practice. We haven't been to practice since the middle of August, but in fall camp, you wouldn't know where Cignetti was half the time. He's very CEO-like, and he said that. He goes, his job is to coach his coaches. The coach's job is to coach the team. Now, he obviously coaches the team too, but he kind of steps back and he lets his guys do it. They're very efficient in practice. I don't know how Ohio State does it, but it used to be at IU, they'd have a clock at one end of the field that would count down like period 10, period 11. They don't have that anymore. They just know when to go to the next thing. There's no clock counting it down. They're just very efficient. The practices are quick. They're fast-paced. They get stuff done. And I know, if during the season, even though practices are close, they don't go more than 2 hours. It's like an hour 45, hour 50. He believes in less is more. They only did 13 spring practices. They didn't do all 15. I don't think they used all their fall camp practices. They don't hit a ton. He believes in keeping the players fresh so that when it comes to game day, they're ready to go. But it's just, his staff's good. Like I said, he just has a knack. I mean, I don't know what it is. And it's why a year and a half ago, when things started to really go south with Tom Allen, I started doing, you guys probably don't do this as much because you guys get a coach and he's there for a while, but I started doing research. Who would be a good fit? And I was trying to find a guy like what Kansas has. I think Lance Leipold, I know Kansas did not have a great year, but Lance Leipold's really good. And he's won at every level he's been. And I was trying to find that guy. And the two guys that kind of stuck out to me were Cignetti and Willie Fritz, who's now at Houston. And I know Houston's not having a great year, but he's a really good coach. He did a great job at Tulane. the difference between Cignetti and Fritz is Cignetti's been with Saban, and he's been at the highest level as an assistant. That kind of separated them. But I thought either guy would be a good hire. And obviously, I never envisioned what's going on. I thought this team could win 8 games, but I would have never believed if you told me they're going to be 10-0. I'd have been like, no way.
Yeah, I think most people would probably have said that. You mentioned the fan base kind of losing hope prior to this. How have you seen kind of the coming together of the fan base? I know watching that Michigan game 2 weeks ago, the atmosphere in Bloomington looked incredible. Just how has everyone kind of rallied around this team as the wins have stacked up?
Yeah, I mean, it was. At first there wasn't a time. I mean, the first game of the season, Florida International, I think they had 40,000, but like by the second half, the stadium was it had cleared out. I mean, there were still people, but a lot of the people left, especially the students. And Cignetti kind of made a little bit of a comment about it. They had Western Illinois on a Friday night. That was not a great crowd. But then once they started winning, it was probably Nebraska, I think, was a sellout. And I think that was the big noon kickoff game, if I remember right. Yeah. And that's when it really started. And all the games have been sold out since. I mean, the Michigan and Purdue game sold out 2 or 3 weeks ago. I mean, or even maybe farther back than that. So the fans have, and I've always said, people, how do you get fans in the stands? I said, it's simple, but it's hard. You win. I mean, if you start winning, people, you know how it is. People want to be associated with a winning thing. They want to cheer for the winning thing. And I get it. And Indiana football had not given people a lot. And remember, in 2020, the last year that they really had a good season, it was COVID. So nobody could go to the game. So you really couldn't get a feel for how the support would have been. But yeah, they've taken to it. And I think Cignetti's personality has been a big part of it. I don't know. I mean, let's just say Tom Allen's the coach and they started off similar. I don't know, maybe not 10-0, but they were 8-2, 9-1. I'm not sure that it would be as exciting. He's the closest thing that Indiana's had to Bob Knight without all the kind of controversial stuff. His personality, his no nonsense kind of way of doing things. He's old school, but he also embraces, the new age portal and NIL. He understands that that's so important. And obviously the portal has been huge for this roster. But he runs things, he runs things kind of an old school way, but then, they play kind of a new age game. It's wide open. They throw the ball. They're aggressive on defense. So he's an interesting guy. I think it's because he got started. So he's 50 years old before he got his first head coaching job. Right. A lot of coaches by that time have been coaching for 10 years as a head coach. So he's just an interesting guy. He grew up in a coaching family. His dad was a coach. And so it's just one of those guys. He's just got a knack for this. It's hard. If you could figure out how somebody does it, nobody would ever lose because you just keep hiring those guys. And it's just really hard to pinpoint and, give credit to IU for finding them and making the hire.
I remember at Big Ten Media Days when he came up on the podium, just being really impressed. I loved the way he handled all that. You mentioned the transfers, and that's where I was going to take you next. I know people who have watched Indiana this year have probably heard on the broadcast them talk about the number of transfers and guys from James Madison. Obviously, Curtis Rourke, the quarterback, being the primary guy. But who are some of these transfers that have kind of transcended from one school to another?
Well, I mean, if you start on offense, I mean, you mentioned Rourke. He's been so good, and obviously, not too far from you guys over there. He's in Athens for the last 4 or 5 years. But Elijah Surratt, the receiver, he was JMU's leading receiver last year. He actually started his career, I think, at St. Francis, okay. And then went to James Madison, and then obviously came to Indiana. Just been really good. It maybe had his poorest game against Michigan, had a couple of drops, which was unusual for him, but he's been really good. Miles Price from Texas Tech, Keyshawn Williams, and Miles Cross from Ohio, all transfer receivers. They've come in, and the thing about the receiver core is, I mean, it's deep, but it's a little different than some where you may have one guy who's a big time stud. There's obviously no Marvin Harrison Jr., but you guys had that. And there's other good receivers, obviously at Ohio State, but there's one guy you kind of key on. I guess you would key on Surratt, but I mean, other guys from week to week, it can be a different guy who steps up. Zach Horton at tight end's been huge. His stats aren't super impressive, but man, he's so good in the block game. I mean, Indiana is one of the top teams in explosive plays, and it's because of his ability to get out on the perimeter and block, and then also in the run game. The running backs, Justice Ellison, Tyson Lawton. Lawton's from JMU, Ellison from Wake Forest. They've been great. The O-line has not really been a position where they've had a bunch of transfers until Michigan. Trey Wettig was the only transfer that was starting from Wisconsin. Then they lost a guy to an Achilles injury. I know you guys are dealing with that over there. Drew Evans, the left guard, got hurt the week of the Michigan game. And Tyler Stevens, who came from JMU, and it was kind of like a sixth offensive lineman. They almost use him as a big tight end in their jumbo package. He's now the starter at left guard. And then defensively, McCall Kamara is all Big Ten. I mean, he's one of the best defensive players in the Big Ten. James Carpenter from JMU as well. He's been good. CJ West from Kent State. It's funny, Kent State's obviously not good at football, but CJ West is really good. The linebackers are both from JMU, Jalen Walker, Nathan Fisher, D'Angelo Pons, the corner, and Sean Asbury at safety. I mean, most of I would say probably 2/3 of the starters. I could be wrong on this, but I guess around 2/3 of the starters are new guys who transferred in. There are some holdovers, but there's a lot of guys, and they hit the portal. They did pretty well. I mean, they had like 28, 2 or 3 have left already. They bailed because they weren't playing. And now that 26, not all of them are starters, but a lot of them are playing special teams or they're rotating in. So they really did a good job hitting on this class, on this portal class.
Yeah, we talked with Caden Curry, who is an Indiana native, and he mentioned last night, I've got a lot of friends over there at Indiana. And then he kind of backtracked and was like, well, I've got some friends over there, obviously, with so many guys from the portal. We had Rick Montoya ask about, will Rourke be ready for this huge stage in the shoe, or will the pressure be too much for him? I want to take that question a different way. Obviously, a couple weeks ago, the talk was like the helmet game against Michigan, right? And how would Indiana respond to that? That was at home. The Hoosiers won that game. How do you see coming to Ohio Stadium and kind of the big game atmosphere that will be around this game for this team?
Well, it'll be interesting because, they played UCLA, Northwestern, and Michigan State road games. That's all they've had. None of those are even coming close. I mean, you could add those 3 together, and they still wouldn't equal what they're going to see on Saturday at Ohio State. Rourke has played. I mean, I think he's played at Penn State when he was at Ohio. So he's played in front of these crowds. I mean, even some of these guys that came from the G5 level, I'm guessing at some point they played in a bigger stadium. And so, that they won't probably be too awestruck by that. To me, it's just, can they go out there and can they execute their game plan? Can they play their game? And, can they do the things they need to do to be successful? The crowd will be a factor. Like I said, they have not played. You guys were at Northwestern. I actually didn't cover that game in person, and it looked like a cool stadium, but it looked like a big high school stadium is what it looked like. Yeah. And there were probably as many Ohio State fans as there were Northwestern fans at that game, if not. Oh, you guys were at Wrigley. My bad. It was at Wrigley. But still, it's a little bit different atmosphere than Ohio State. UCLA, it's a cool place, but there was no atmosphere. And then Michigan State, that team the stadium was about 2/3 full, and by halftime it was half empty. So this is going to be a big test. Can they run their offense? Especially on offense is when you're going to see it, because they're not going to be noisy when Ohio State's got the ball. Can you run your offense? Can you communicate? Can you not get those pre-snap penalties, the procedures, stuff like that really puts you behind the sticks against a defense that you can't get behind the sticks against?
The defense for me is something that I feel like doesn't get talked about enough for Indiana. You look at the stats and they're maybe the best defense in the country, taking into account who they've played. You mentioned a bunch of the transfers, but just why has this defense been successful? What do they do schematically? What have you noticed from this group throughout the season?
Well, you hear defensive coaches say it all the time, but this team, they really swarm to the ball. You rarely see a guy getting tackled by Indiana when there's not 3 or 4 other guys right there too. They don't blitz a ton. They're tops in tackles for loss, right up there. Them and Ohio State are like, I think 1-2 in sacks, 1-2 in tackles for loss. And it's mainly with the front 4. I think it's, again, Brian Haynes. I think he's an Ohio guy, played at Ball State, was actually a GA, I believe, at Ohio State. He also was a GA at Indiana at one point. He's a really good coach. He's going to be a head coach at some point, maybe sooner rather than later. He just does a great job with this scheme. This staff probably adjusts as good as any staff I've ever seen in Indiana. I mean, when they had Kalen DeBoer here as the OC, he was probably the best I'd seen at making mid-game adjustments. Whatever you're doing is not working, and you have to switch it up. And this staff's really good at it. They've had quarters where maybe they didn't play great, but they always, the defense won the Michigan game. The offense was non-existent in the second half, and the defense flat out won that game. The defense kept them in the Maryland game when IU turned it over 4 times and didn't get any takeaways and still won by 2 touchdowns. I mean, this defense has played really, really well. This will be interesting. They've not faced anything like this. The speed, the athleticism, the explosiveness all over the field. And, one of the things I'll be interested in seeing is how do they tackle? They tackled for the most part pretty good. A couple games, if you go by PFF, a couple games that were so-so. But, tackling these athletes, a Travion Henderson, a Judkins, a Jermaine Smith, these guys in space is going to be a real challenge. And it's going to be key. You're going to have to get these guys to the ground. Ohio State's going to move the ball. They're too good. Can you get them off the field in the red zone and maybe hold them to field goals? Or when you get them in those third situations where it's, kind of a challenge, can you get a stop and get off the field? But it'll be interesting. They're aggressive. They fly to the ball. They're physical. Everybody on this defense will hit you. It's just the coaches have done a really good job plugging these guys in. They're a little thin, I'll say that. If they get an injury or two, they have not had any major injuries other than the offensive linemen all year. But if they would have any on defense, it could be trouble for them.
You mentioned the 2020 season earlier. Obviously, that year the Hoosiers go 6-2 in the weird COVID season. The next year, 2-10. Can, in your eyes, this be a building block for better things to come in future seasons? Or how do you kind of see what Indiana does? I know we're focused on this game and this year, but just going forward, can they build on this success, regardless of how this year ends, to kind of sustain better than the last time this team was pretty good?
Yeah, it's a fair question. And I mean, after Cignetti got the extension over the weekend,
right,
I was on a local radio show and they asked, your thoughts on this contract and doubling his salary after one good year. And while it's not apples to apples, Michigan State did this with Mel Tucker. Now, take away the off the field stuff. He had that really good first season, and he did it primarily using the portal. They got Kenneth Walker. They got a bunch of good players, and they went out there, and I can't remember. I think they won 9 games or 10 games, whatever it was. I think the difference is Mel Tucker, Tom Allen, when he had that good year, they didn't have the track record as a head coach. And I know it's not at this level, but he's been a head coach for what, 14 years now, 15 years, whatever it is. He's done this. He's worked for the greatest of all time, in my opinion, in Saban. He's worked for other guys, Chuck Amato, Johnny Majors at Pitt. He's, I know football's different. Do I think they're going to go 10-0 start off for every year? No. I mean, let's be honest. That's probably not going to happen. But I do think he has significantly raised the floor of Indiana football. To me, the ceiling of Indiana football used to be 7, maybe 8 wins if you had a good season. Let's face it, they had never won 10 games in the season before.
Right.
The most they had was 9 in 1945, and I think the 67 team that went to the Rose Bowl never won. And they're at 10. I think he's raised the floor of Indiana to 7 or 8 wins, and then some years you have a year like this where it comes together, and maybe you make a run for the playoff, and a regular year maybe like 8-9 wins. I really believe that. The Big Ten's hard. 18 teams now, and there's a lot of good teams with Oregon and these other teams coming in. And let's face it. At some point, UCLA and USC are going to probably be better. Washington's probably going to be better than they are this year. But I just, he's a really good coach. I've been doing this a long time, and he's just different. I've never seen the coach in Indiana like this, especially the football program. And I don't think it'll be slowing down. And the portal helps. The portal levels it a little bit where you can, in the past, if you lost 17, 18 guys out of your top 22, it may take a couple years to get back because you're going to be relying on freshmen. Now you can just go replace those guys with guys just like the guys you lost for the most part. I think that really helps. I think you have to be careful with the portal because, you're playing with fire, I think, a little bit. I think down the road, the portal will be less of a reliance than it is now. He had to go to the portal. They had 30-something guys in the portal. He had to, and he's going to have to next year because they got a number of seniors. But I think as it goes on, I think he'd like to, make it more balanced between high school and portal and not so, end loaded one way.
And let me ask you this to end. Regardless of what happens Saturday, I think both of these teams are in good position to be in the college football playoff. What would it mean for a program like Indiana to be a part of that, regardless of what happens on the field then, but just to have gone through the season we've talked about and get to a college football playoff? What does that mean for Indiana football?
Well, I mean, it'd be unbelievable. And what's funny is I was taught, I thought in 2020, if there would have been a 12-team playoff, I think Indiana actually would have been in. I want to say they were like 11th,
Yeah.
at least in the rankings. I don't know how it would have been with the committee, but in the rankings, they were like 11th. And obviously, they had that great game at Ohio State where, Penix went crazy and they had the big comeback. It would be huge. And listen, I get the chatter coming out of the South about Indiana's schedule. I get it. Their non-conference schedule was quite honestly 3 layups, even for a program like Indiana. But I've also said, when you're at a school like Indiana, you need to schedule 3 wins until you get it going. And the Big Ten, I don't agree with it, but the Big Ten plays 9 conference games. The SEC doesn't. The ACC doesn't. The Big 12 does. But really, it's the ACC or the SEC and the Big Ten that kind of run college football. I think it's a mistake to play 9 games, but I get it. They do it. But for a school like Indiana, when you schedule a game at Cincinnati, you schedule, whoever a Louisville game, that's like a 10th conference game. I mean, down the road, will that change? I think it will. They've already got Notre Dame on the schedule in like 2030 or something like that. So I get it. But Indiana can't help that Maryland's underachieved. They can't help that Michigan State's not as good as people thought. Nebraska was 5-1 when Indiana played them. I think right on the fringe of top 25, they blew their doors off. And I don't know, maybe they broke Nebraska because they haven't won since. What they've done is they've handled every team they've played rather easily, except for the Michigan game. They beat everybody soundly, and that's all they can do. I mean, people, IU fans are arguing they should be I'm not going to get into it. Play it on the field. I get the schedule argument. Last year Michigan's schedule till the very end wasn't very strong either, and they were beating up on teams. But let me put it this way. I think if you had a different helmet on this Indiana team and they were 10-0, you wouldn't get as much talk about the schedule. And I'm not picking on Ohio State or Michigan or anybody or Penn State, but then again, those schools, the school you cover, you guys have earned that credibility. You've earned it with years of great football. Indiana has it. They've been a joke. And now they're going to have to go out and earn it themselves. And this Saturday will be a big chance for them to earn that respect.
And just real quick, if Indiana does lose this game, but it's respectable, if it's a close loss, do you think that still earns that respect that you're talking about?
I think so. I mean, I think if you're competitive, this game's kind of back and forth, or it's basically like a 1-score game. I think that they're 5th. To me, that's a big deal. They would have to drop 8 spots.
Yeah.
Miami was whatever they were, and they lost. And let's be honest, losing at Georgia Tech is not the same as losing at Ohio State. And I think they dropped 4 or 5 spots, like 9th. I could be wrong on that, but they stayed in the top 12. I think they still stay in the 12. I mean, they're going to be down there. They're definitely going to be playing on the road that first week, which is fine. I always say just get an invitation to the party and anything can happen. That's what you got to do. So I think if it's a competitive game, I think they got a real good shot to stay in the playoff.
Awesome, Matt. Thank you. I know it's a busy week for both of us, so I appreciate you giving me the time. I thought you brought some really good stuff to this, so I appreciate you jumping on.
Okay. Thanks, Patrick.
All right. Talk to you later. All right. Thanks again to Matt Weaver from Peegs.com, our 24/7 Sports Indiana site. You can go over there and check out stuff. They do a really good job. Certainly more of a basketball site normally, but this year football has taken more of the focus. A couple things I saw pop up here during that that I didn't get time to. Rick Montoya asked, has Indiana played from behind all season? Yes, they trailed Michigan State early, and then I believe it was Michigan State. They trailed Michigan State. I'm pulling up this game here. 10-0, and then they scored 47 straight points. I think that's the only time Indiana has trailed this season, because I don't think they trailed against Michigan. I'm double checking this as we talk. Indiana did trail Michigan 3-0 early in that game. So twice this season they've trailed and won both games, obviously. And then Todd, I'm not even McElmurray, maybe, says, salute Patrick from France. Cheers. Appreciate you hopping on in France right now. I feel like you could be doing a lot of other things in France rather than hanging out with us, but I do appreciate it. All right. I want to end the podcast with a couple things about this game that stand out to me. And the first is probably the most obvious, the offensive line. The Buckeyes need to find a way And I think, as we talked about earlier with Tim, moving Carson Hinsman over to center, putting Austin Serveld, who's obviously played in at left guard, is probably the best way to do this. But you need to maintain that momentum you've got going. And look, it's not going to be easy. Seth McLaughlin is a big loss. He becomes such a huge part of this team, both from a pure talent standpoint and what he'd done on the field physically, but the leadership, calling the plays, being, as Urban Meyer used to put it, I love this term, the apex of the offensive line, the apex of the offense. Now, fortunately, other than Austin Serveld, there's a lot of experience on that offensive line at this point. Even Tegra Shabola, who's a first-year starter, a lot of experience, has played in big games at this point. He's got Will Howard behind him, which I think will help. And I think learning from Seth McLaughlin this year will make a big difference, as I said earlier. But you need to see this offensive line carry over from what they've done. It needs to keep going. Indiana has a good defensive front, and it will challenge the Buckeyes. I think if you come out of this game feeling good about the offensive line's performance, you'll feel better about it next week, and you can just build on that. There's going to be struggles, as Tim said earlier. It's not going to be perfect. You can't, it wasn't perfect against Penn State either, right? Once Abdul Carter kind of figured out a little bit on Donovan Jackson late in the first half, he's able to get 2 sacks, got some pressures, things like that. It's got to be good enough. And like I said earlier, this doesn't need to be a big win. Like, you just need to win this game, especially as you're trying to figure things out on the offensive line for the 5th time this season. Yeah, 5 times. Donovan Jackson was out early. That was 1. Then Donovan Jackson comes back in. That's 2. Josh Simmons gets hurt. 3. Zen Michalski gets hurt. 4. And now this, 5. 5 times. I can't remember that happening, at least to an Ohio State offensive line in a long time. I'm sure there are other examples of injuries out there. So for me, that's it. We talked about it earlier. The secondary got to hold up against these Indiana receivers. I think they will. And I will add a caveat in there that this rush has to get home, as we were talking about before Matt came on. I liked what they were doing against Northwestern. It didn't always get home. I want Jack Sawyer to be a bit more disciplined so quarterbacks don't just jump by him, things like that. I don't know how many sacks you need to get on Rourke, but you need to make him feel uncomfortable. Don't let him sit back there and throw. You saw him, not rattled, but he didn't play as well against Michigan as he had. Remember, he's coming off surgery on his hand, or his thumb. So, this was a few weeks now, but it's still there. So that for me. And this goes sort of hand in hand with the rushing, or excuse me, the offensive line. But this is a question from Rick Montoya. Will Trey and Quinshawn wear down the Indiana defense the second half? Will conditioning be a factor? For me, this running game is huge. At halftime of the Northwestern game, I was like, man, they're really struggling to get this going. I know Northwestern has a good rush defense. Indiana also a good rush defense. They are allowing, let me pull this up real quick. They are allowing 72.2 yards per game on the ground. That is the best in the country. So I'm not saying it will be easy, but I want to see the Buckeyes stick with it. Like they did against Northwestern. I want to see them, as Seth McLaughlin's, tribute to him, the hats, run the damn ball and, do exactly like Rick says, wear them down. I talked to Quinshon Judkins about this. He said he can feel as teams start to wear down as you keep running the ball on him. And I think with a new look offensive line, again, running the ball is what the offensive line likes to do. So just keep doing it. Keep doing it. Obviously, you have the star receivers. You got Will Howard. You can run Will Howard, which I think they will do. But you've got to run the damn ball. And I think that's going to be huge in this game. And then to wrap it up here, I like to end this with what you'll be reading Saturday night, Sunday afternoon, or Sunday morning. For me, I'm not sugarcoating anything here. I think the Buckeyes win this one. I think it's going to be nervy at times, but I think the headline will read something along Buckeyes pass top 5 test. sights set on Michigan. Because remember, you got a top 5 game. We were talking about this in Chicago last week. I was talking about with Steve Hellwagon and some other guys. Like when the schedule makers put this together, I don't think they thought, oh, before Michigan, we'll give Ohio State a top 5 game. But you do. That's the way it works out. Top 5 game, boom. Attention to Michigan. Let's go. Win the game. That's how you got to do it. So I think that's what you'll see. I will have more from Matt on the site here in a little while, his question and answers with me. I tried to cover different stuff in that than I covered on here. So make sure you go read that on Bucknuts. Plenty more. We'll have our staff predictions and the roundtable tomorrow, Friday. So look out for that. Lots more still coming before this game. Thanks to all of you for tuning in, whether you watch this live or listen to it on the podcast after the fact. Thanks to Tim Hall for coming on from The Fan. Thanks to Matt Weaver from Peegs.com, our 24/7 Sports Indiana site. This should be a fun one, guys. They're fun the rest of the way. And if the Buckeyes keep winning, offensive line problems aside, it could be a fun holiday season, fun New Year's, fun into the New Year's. So we'll be here for all of it. Cheers, Buckeye fans.